Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a look at the endocrine system. This PowerPoint goes along with Chapter 8 in your textbooks, so my suggestion would be maybe to fill in anything that, that I haven't mentioned or shown a slide for using your textbook, so use the two of them together. The glands that we're going to be looking at as part of the endocrine glands include some of the ones that are in this diagram. You can see the diagram as representing both males and females, and most of the glands that are here are common to both males and females, obviously the exception being the reproductive organs, ovary for female and testes for male. Endocrine glands are different than the glands you learned about last year, which were exocrine glands. You learned about some digestive glands last year where they manufacture particular digestive enzymes and then would release those enzymes into a particular area, i.e. into the stomach or into the mouth or into the intestines directly. Endocrine glands are different in that they do not target the organ directly. Rather, the gland makes its product and releases its product into the bloodstream, and the hormones travel in the bloodstream to their target organ or organs. There are 8 major endocrine glands. However, there are some regions of other glands that have a partial endocrine function. So they may secrete some kind of hormones, but in sort of lower levels, or it's a secondary function to their main function, i.e. stomach, intestines, and heart have some tissue that is endocrine in nature, but that's not their primary function. So we're not going to include it in our study at this time. Okay, the glands that, the major glands that comprise the endocrine system are the pituitary gland, and I've put hypothalamus and pituitary gland here. The hypothalamus is really part of the brain, but it has a glandular function, produces and secretes hormones that have control over the pituitary gland. So we'll be learning much more about them. The pineal gland, which is sometimes referred to as the third eye. The thyroid gland, which is a butterfly-shaped gland that we find at our throat. And the parathyroid glands, 4 little dots that we find on top of the thyroid gland. Originally, we thought that the functions of both of these were as a result of a single gland, but on further consideration, we realized that they were 2 separate types of glands. The thymus gland, which is active when you are a baby, but becomes very inactive as you reach adulthood. The adrenal glands that are found on top of the kidney, so adrenal on top of the kidney, also referred to as renal. The part of the pancreas known as the islets of Langerhans. There are 2 kinds of cells in the islets of Langerhans that are going to produce different hormones that we will look at. The last of the 8 are the gonads, testes for male and ovaries for female. If you look at the list here, you'll see all of the ones that are written in blue are the ones that you will be responsible for test purposes. The 2 in black we are not going to study in any detail this year. The pineal gland is kind of interesting, found mostly in vertebrates. Pineal gland is thought to have a pretty big role to play in terms of our sleep cycle, and as part of that is a source of melatonin, which is a hormone that helps regulate our sleep-wake pattern. And if you're jet-lagged, it's possible you may be advised to take melatonin to reset your wake-sleep cycle. In lower vertebrates, this particular gland also seems to have a bit of an ability to differentiate between light and dark, and hence this idea maybe of the third eye. The second gland that we're not going to be responsible for is the thymus gland. If the gland is removed in adulthood, it seems to have very little effect, maybe has a bit of an immune effect for younger children. But again, because it doesn't really do much for us as adults, we won't spend any time now looking at it in any more detail. In general, we've got two basic large groups of hormones. We've got those that are made from steroid materials and include things like testosterone and estrogen. And those materials, those hormones, steroid hormones, have a different way of affecting the cell than our other large category, which is the protein hormones or proteinaceous hormones. We understand from Unit 1 that our cell membrane is made largely of phospholipids, and because of its lipid nature, these steroid hormones are able to sort of slide in between the phospholipids and enter the cell to affect them in a particular way, where protein hormones are quite large protein pieces are unable to cross through the cell membrane in the same way. So the way they affect the cell is quite different. We're going to look at a general way that the hormones can affect the cells. Keep in mind that there's going to be individual differences specific to the hormone and the organ that it affects. So we're just looking at a general overview here. Steroids, as I mentioned, are able to pass through the bilayer, and usually we'll find that there is some kind of receptor protein awaiting them inside of the cytoplasm of the cell. The steroid hormone is able to couple with the receptor, and together the component or the complex generally is able, or the two together are able to affect the DNA directly, telling the DNA which genes are required for transcription and later translation to make a protein that is needed to respond to a particular situation. So it's a very direct route that they're able to take. They can go through the cell membrane and then again through the nuclear membrane. Protein hormones don't have that luxury. If you have a look here, sorry about that, if you have a look here at this diagram, you can see that our protein hormone is pictured in sort of an aqua color. It is not able to pass through the membrane. However, there is a receptor that you'll find in the actual cell membrane. So the protein doesn't have to pass through the bilayer. The receptor is embedded in the bilayer itself. When the protein hormone is able to couple with the receptor, in this case pink in the diagram, then there can be one of many different signals sent to the inside of the cell. So it initiates a response. One version or one way that it may respond is by having something like cyclic AMP, which we saw before, has a certain amount of control on certain prokaryotic operons, if you remember from doing your lac operon, may act as a messenger to activate a particular thing to happen in the cell, i.e. maybe if this was a messenger that's telling us that we're going to have a whole lot of glycogen that's going to be converted from stored glycogen in our muscle, and we're going to use it to break down in our cells, then in this case we're saying that maybe there is a response that the enzyme that's required to break down glycogen is going to become available. And again, there would be an impact from the DNA. The DNA would get the signal. This particular gene is required to be transcribed and translated, so we have this enzyme available to do this particular job. But that's a bit of a specific example. Right, we're going to have a little look again at the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands. We see exocrine on the left and endocrine on the right here. Don't worry about the spelling of exocrine in my diagram. It's sort of an English spelling for it. Sometimes you may see that in literature. We use the INE version, but don't worry about that. The exocrine gland that you see on the left is, the picture is supposed to show us that the product of the gland, whatever it might be, is being secreted directly into or onto wherever that material is required. This, I think, is meant to be a sebaceous gland, so it's producing oil and it's being secreted onto the surface of the skin. The gland on the right is an endocrine gland, and we can see that it's the gland itself is surrounded by blood vessels, showing us that the product of that particular gland is going to find its way into the bloodstream, and the hormone is going to travel the bloodstream until its target organ is found. So a little description here in a table, and it was a sweat gland, I guess, this one above here, so not sebaceous but rather sweat, so the water and salt and so on being secreted out, and the other one is meant to represent something like, say, an ovary or part of the pancreas where we would have secretions into the blood. All right, the hormones themselves, whether they are steroid hormones or proteinaceous hormones, can have different effects. Some of the hormones affect a specific kind of cell, and we would say that these hormones are target hormones. The material that's produced is only going to target one kind of cell. Or they can be non-target, where they are going to be able to affect several or many different kinds of cells. A good example of a non-target cell might be something like insulin, where all the cells or almost all the cells in the body are affected by it, where something like parathyroid hormone might be a good example of a target hormone. It's going to be targeting a specific area, and we will, or a specific thing, and we'll be looking at that when we look at the glands in more detail. So hopefully we'll be able to recall the idea of specificity and apply that to the hormones as we learn them. Okay, so let's focus on the ones that we are going to spend some time looking at. Might as well start at the top with the pituitary gland, and we can see the hypothalamus is labeled here and the pituitary gland underneath it, right in the center of the brain above the nasal sinuses. So the pituitary gland is a master gland. So the hypothalamus controls the pituitary gland, maybe it's middle management, and the pituitary gland controls the other endocrine glands in the body. The pituitary gland is a double gland. It has an anterior lobe and a posterior lobe. In the anterior lobe, it produces its own hormones, and we're going to be looking at those hormones: growth hormone, prolactin, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, and adrenocortico can't remember what the T stands for. Anyway, look that up. It's an adrenal stimulator that it produces, and those hormones are going to be regulated. The release of those are going to be regulated by the hypothalamus. So the pituitary gland creates them, but the release is controlled by the hypothalamus. In the posterior lobe, there's two hormones that are actually produced in the hypothalamus and stored in the posterior lobe. So the pituitary gland does not manufacture these, and the hypothalamus does regulate the release of them, however. So ADH, which is one we looked at already when we were looking at the kidney, and oxytocin, which is one of the hormones we talked about in the very beginning of this unit when we talked about the idea of positive feedback. So those are produced by the hypothalamus, and they are stored in the posterior pituitary gland. All right, the pancreas has an exocrine and an endocrine part, as I mentioned before, and this is a pretty good little diagram that we've got here. It's showing the exocrine portions in pink and the endocrine portions in sort of blue, I guess, if you like. And exocrine through a duct would support or would secrete digestive enzymes into some of the digestive organs. This other part, the endocrine part of the pancreas, is going to be secreting into the blood vessels, which you can see meandering through here. The cells that produce the exocrine hormones are called the islets of Langerhans. There are two kinds, the alpha and the beta cells. Alpha cells are going to produce and secrete a hormone called glucagon, which causes glycogen, which we store in our muscles and in our liver, to be converted into glucose. So if you had low blood sugar, this hormone glucagon could promote the conversion of stored sugar in the form of glycogen. It would enable the conversion of that stored glycogen into glucose so that we could increase the blood sugar. And in the beta cells, we have the the production of the hormone insulin, which makes the cells more permeable to glucose. So in this case, if we were increasing or if we had lots and lots of blood sugar, maybe we just ate or something like that, then insulin would be secreted and it would enable the glucose to more effectively pass through the cell membrane. Glucose is fairly large and fairly charged, and we know it's not going to move easily through the cell membrane. So insulin can help with that. The thyroid gland sits just above just sort of over our trachea, which is the cartilaginous tube that you have in the front of your throat that leads from mouth and nose to the lungs. And you can see here that it's divided into lobes, the right thyroid gland and the left thyroid gland, and sits just under the larynx or voice box. There's a couple of hormones that are secreted by the thyroid gland. We'll group two of them together. Thyroxine and its sort of partner here have almost identical functions. We'll really just be considering thyroxine for our purposes, and it regulates metabolism and growth and differentiation of tissue. So an increased amount of thyroid means an increased metabolism, and you may hear people talk about the fact that their thyroid is not working well. They may be hypo or hyper in that aspect, so they may make too much thyroxine and they can't maintain a proper weight or metabolic rate, or they may not produce enough. So sometimes people will have to take thyroid hormone. A very key component of thyroxine is iodine. You must have iodine available in the body to grow or to produce enough thyroxine. If you're lacking iodine, the thyroid gland will work harder and harder and harder until it swells, and you get what is known as a goiter. And there's a picture of one in your textbook, or you can Google goiter, G-O-I-T-E-R, and have a look at what that might look like. So you want to make sure you have lots of iodine. Think about that for a minute. What food or food supplement do we have in Canada that has iodine added to it, just in case we don't get enough in our regular diet, so that we don't have that issue? All right, the other hormone that's secreted by the thyroid gland that's of interest to us is calcitonin. Calcitonin has an impact on calcium levels in the blood. So it will lower calcium levels in the blood, remove calcium if they're high in the blood, remove calcium from the blood, and basically deposit that calcium in the bone cells, which is good for us. So if you're drinking lots of milk, you're going to have lots of calcium in there to help with the growth of your bone, or the growth or maintenance of your bone tissue. The parathyroid gland is composed of the little dots that are on top of the thyroid gland. We have the upper parathyroids and the lower parathyroids. The parathyroid gland is a bit of an unusual gland in the sense that it is not regulated by nerves or hormones, but rather, so this one is not controlled by the pituitary gland or the hypothalamus. It is directly controlled by the calcium levels in the blood. So parathyroid hormone is basically, its role is to increase calcium levels, so sort of the opposite of calcitonin. Increase calcium levels in the blood, so it can impact several different areas, one which is the kidney, and it can help the kidney to retain calcium, and also the gut, and help the gut to absorb more of the calcium that might be in the food that's being processed. Also, parathyroid hormone activates vitamin D and helps us be able to use the calcium more effectively. So it's kind of an independent set of 4 little patches of gland. All right, testosterone and other testosterone-like hormones are produced in the testes, and there's a cross-section of a testis here. The pathway for the testes, the production of sperm and the production of testosterone, are controlled by 2 of the pituitary hormones called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, luteinizing hormone. And there's a set of pathways that we'll be looking at around how those two hormones help stimulate the production of testosterone and also the development of sperm and secondary sex characteristics and so on. So we'll have a closer look at that feedback loop, negative feedback loop. And ovaries, also controlled by FSH and LH, and in fact these hormones, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, actually have a better fit name-wise to what happens in females and were first identified in females. Again, regulated by the hypothalamus. And these hormones from the pituitary gland are going to be in charge of the female monthly cycle and the production of progesterone and estrogen, along with the ovulation and menses. So we're going to look at those ideas a little bit more carefully as well. Okay, so that's the end of the overview of those glands. Again, there's a couple of those pathways we'll be looking at in more detail in class. Have a look through your text and make sure that we haven't left anything out, and come to class with any questions that you may have had as we were going through that.